Hello and welcome to another Frontline question and answer with me, Philip Ingram. Now, as you can see, we're now on our own new channel. Hey, exciting stuff. That's because you've made it too much of a success. And now we have to start to adjust everything. So please bear with us as we do it. But we haven't got membership set up yet. Don't know why the technical guys haven't been able to do it, but hey, I'm not a technical guy. They're onto it, and we'll get that done soon. But today, as ever, we're answering comments from our channel subscribers and some from our old channel subscribers or subscribers to our old channel. And when we get membership set up on this channel, we'll do that from here. I'm Philip Ingram. I present Frontline, but I'm a former senior British military intelligence officer, and I commentate globally on all matters defence, warfare, cyber, terrorism, and anything else that people ask me to do. And first comment comes in from Astro, and this shows how our comments are working. Astro, good to hear from you again. You say you do your best to subscribe to all Times radio channels and of course look forward to Frontline having its own. We've now got it. That's brilliant. And you just noticed that your comment was included in last week's show. Of course it was. The team in the background, no matter what the technical difficulties are trolling your comments from everywhere to find the best ones that we can bring in for me to rabbit on about on these updates. So next, our first proper comment comes from Joshua. And Joshua, a good question. You ask, why wouldn't Putin use tactical nukes to save having to spend so much on military presence? He gets a lot of damage done with spending as much on different weapons. Damage with tactical nukes. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what a tactical nuclear weapon is. It's a small yield, small range nuclear weapon. From a damage on the battlefield, what's the sort of area that would be destroyed? Probably 1 square kilometre. Now, the overall length of the battlefield, the front line in eastern Ukraine is 650 plus kilometres. That is an awful lot of tactical nukes that would have to be used on it to have an effect at all the troops that are there. And you don't get the same sort of concentrations that tactical nukes were developed for during that were anticipated during the Cold War, if that ever went hot. And therefore, there's not going to be a massive military effect from that. But the fact of exploding a nuclear device on a battlefield or anywhere else means it would automatically have a strategic effect. That strategic effect would be for all of those countries that are tacitly supporting Russia at the moment, and including here China and Iran and India and buying Russian oil and everything else, would very, very quickly indeed pull away from that. And therefore it would be disastrous for Putin. He would lose his ability to continue to prosecute the conflict with the support of the people that he's getting support of at the moment, because that would lift things to the next level. I think the West, if Putin carried out a tactical nuclear attack, would respond. It wouldn't respond in kind. It would respond with conventional weapons. But this is where the line would have been crossed. The West would respond, and I think every Russian military formation, headquarters, vehicle, concentration inside the boundaries, the borders of Ukraine at the moment would disappear within a relatively short period of time using conventional weapons. And those conventional capabilities exist with air forces and with missile capabilities and everything else. The targets for all of those are known. The targets will have been programmed into Western missiles in case this sort of thing happens, and that message will be being sent to Moscow very frequently to say, we hear your nuclear saber rattling, don't you ever go there. And I don't think they will go there. I don't think Putin is that daft. Tactical nuclear weapon in name only, because of its range and because of its yield. There's no such thing as a tactical nuclear weapon when it comes to strategic effect, and it would have a strategic effect, a very negative one. But a good question, and one that is worth me reinforcing time and time again. Marty, next question. Another question could be, how much can we trust the 1% growth of the Russian GDP? I'd say not very much. Marty, you're 100% right. We can't trust any of the figures that are coming out of Russia at all about their economy. The indicator that I've used in the last couple of days, and I find quite amusing, is the inflation rate for cucumbers. Quoted in the Russian newspapers as a real concern. 425%. And that was quoted this week. That does not turn around and say a 1% growth in the Russian economy, especially whenever there's an increasing number of Russian factories are saying they can't pay their workers, they're running up debts, and they're saying they're in recession. So public Russian growth figures against reality, it's fantasy. And you've hit the nail on the head with that. Next question from Andrew. And Andrew, this is a good one. Because you say, imagine, Philip, I imagine that as an intelligence officer, you didn't receive your intelligence with flashing red lights saying, this is of immediate importance. Or perhaps you did. What made you decide to disregard some intelligence, choose to observe some others, and act immediately on another piece of information? How were the decisions made? Right, let's sit back here. This could be a long one. No, a really, really, really good question. You do get some bits of intelligence with big red flashing lights and big bells. It comes in with the precedence that it's sent, so it can be sent flash. You get a signal that comes in flash. That means it requires an immediate response, as opposed to an immediate signal or a routine signal or a priority signal or other bits and pieces. The other thing you get is from a single source intelligence is something that would be labelled a tipper. So if you've got a flash tipper, that tends to be that the person who's collected it has done an immediate bit of analysis on it and said somebody needs to be aware of this very quickly indeed, and puts it back to the decision makers. And I would have been one of those intelligence decision makers. It would then come into me, and I would look at it, or come into part of one of my team. My team would very quickly have a look at how that fitted in with what we generally knew of what was going on and other intelligence that was coming in from elsewhere. If it fitted the narrative that was there, that would be elevated to me to have another look at it, and we then sit down and have a very short discussion about whether we needed to take immediate action, or whether if it didn't fit, what we were going to do about it, because someone had made a decision that this was flash. 90% of the time, if the intelligence came in from signals intelligence, so intercepting a conversation or something else, and we did that, and we had gone through and gone, this just doesn't fit, it doesn't feel right. A lot of it comes down to the feeling of what you get from having built up knowledge and working in the theatre. If it doesn't feel right, I'd then apply what I call soak time. Now, soak time from a British perspective is you put it in the in tray, ready to go, and you go make a cup of tea. And you sit down and have a nice mug of tea, and you can guarantee that 99 times out of 100, the time you've got your second sip of the cup of tea, there's been a retranslation of what was intercepted, and that retranslation changes the meaning of the flash tipper that came in. And then that gives you something else to sit and analyse in a different way. The 1% of the time where you've got it, you can usually get away with that. A cup of tea doesn't take long to make, and it still gives you time to react. Different cultural things. The Americans tend to react to every tipper, and I've seen B-52 bombers being moved and flown at a target against a tipper where the translation of the conversation that had been intercepted was wrong, and that gets very dangerous. The Americans have got the assets to do that. They've got the resources to make those sorts of mistakes and to turn the bombers around. The British don't. That's why we have a slightly more cynical view almost to it. And it's balancing it in with all source intelligence. So it's bringing in what is logical. It's bringing in intelligence from other sources, applying it all together. And once you've got that all source picture, you can then bring a degree of confidence in. And then when we're giving our assessments out and we're giving our recommendations for action to the staffs that control military action, we give a degree of confidence. And that degree of confidence is based on the percentage of accuracy we can apply to the truth. And in human terms, it goes from A and 1. There are 2 levels. You grade the source of the information, you grade the information as to whether it fits the wider intelligence picture, and you can then put that together and give that to the operators and say, we think this is going to happen. It's of a grade B from the source, which says usually reliable, but it's 3 in that we can't assess whether it is going to happen or not going to happen, or 5, which is it's unreliable, 6 is don't have enough information to assess, or 1 is it's completely truthful, completely reliable, and you have to react now. You very rarely come across a 1. So a very long subject. There's a couple of hours worth of lectures on that if people would want them. I can put those together. But that's a quick overview as to how the intelligence process goes. Bit scientific, bit bringing stuff together, a bit of wet finger in the air, but based on knowledge, experience, and everything else. Next point comes in from Taz, commenting on the interview with George Barras, and you say, from what I understand is that Russia can listen in to your conversations. If that is the case, should information such as this not be classified? George knows perfectly well what the Russians can listen into. The Ukrainians know perfectly well what the Russians can listen into. And the discussion that we had didn't give anything away that I would even class into the sensitive bracket. The Russians know well the Ukrainian command and control system and what's happening there. And actually, between us, let's hope the Russians aren't listening into this. But they should be worried, because this level of coordination is absolutely superb and will help the Ukrainians in the battlefield. The Russians are trying to emulate it, but culturally they can't, and they won't be able to. They don't have the experience amongst their troops. They don't have the people that are training them to be able to gain that experience and to operate in that sort of way. Ukrainians do. Because remember, many of their troops are now being trained in the West or by Western troops. So don't pass that on. Keep that strictly between us. Next comment comes from Container Core. And you say, is it 30k Russian casualties or 30k KIA per month? We've heard some people drop both, but it's a big difference, of course. It is a big difference. It is about 30,000. We're talking of 1,000 to 1,200 a day being killed or severely wounded, and that's Russian casualties. So it is Russian casualties. However, the Russian medical support is so poor that the majority of those that get severely wounded go on to die. So it's very difficult to assess from the imagery that people are analysing, and that's where a lot of these figures come from, analysing the drone imagery, analysing other imagery from the battlefield, exactly how many have died immediately or are casevaced and taken and die somewhere in the medical or lack of medical chain. The Russians are not even allowing people to get full medical attention before they send them back to the front line again on their crutches or with bandages that are festering. And the Ukrainians have actually captured Russians who have been so close to death because of sepsis setting into wounds, because they're not being treated with the appropriate drugs and then everything else after being wounded. So, 30,000 a month killed and wounded, and the majority turn into killed after not a long period of time. Shocking figures. Then final point comes from Dustin. And Dustin, you say Europe has missiles way better than the Tomahawk. Where are they? I don't know, Dustin. I wish I did. Different countries are providing different missiles. All depends on the national priority. All depends on the stocks that exist in each of the countries. All depends on the logistic support that's needed to be able to integrate those missiles onto the platforms to launch them or to target them into different places. And often that is very difficult. I don't know why the German Taurus missile hasn't been provided. I don't know whether that's down to the fact that politically the Germans are finding it very difficult because of the reliance on green votes in the Bundestag, or whether the missile isn't as reliable as the Germans believe it is, or German politicians believe it is, and the military don't want to be embarrassed, or whether they don't have as many stocks as they thought they had and don't want to denude the stocks from a German perspective. And again, with other missiles across Europe, you can overload a military by giving it too many things, especially whenever they all require different ways of operating them, firing them, maintaining them, and targeting them. So it's a balance, and I think we're getting the balance about right at the moment. We need to provide more things that go whoosh and go bang, of the natures that the Ukrainians are used to operating now. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching this week's question and answer and for posting your questions. Remember, Frontline is also available on Times Radio on the overnight programming. If you are an insomniac in the UK, it's at 01:35 hours Greenwich Mean Time. But if you're in the United States, it's even better for you because that's at 20:35 Eastern Standard Time. And we're available still on all your favourite podcast platforms. Just search for Frontline. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.